Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies.
I pushed through the yellow tape and an officer grabbed my wrist before I could step into the Col D. Sac, you can tee. He began. I said, Sheriff, I have to see it, and he let go a hair early, as if my name mattered more than the barrier. Suspicion sat in my throat like grit. I smelled dust, diesel, and chalk. A circle had been drawn on the asphalt near the burned curb. A child's rhyme was smudged in small, uneven letters beside it. The neighbor's jacket lay folded over a porch rail 2 houses down, and the paramedic techs kept their distance. The central problem was immediate. The rhyme predicted a disappearance, and the missing neighbor matched the verse on the ground. I scanned faces. Sheriff Alvarez kept his jaw tight. Officer Manley tapped his glove against the tape. A uniform beside them said nothing. They had questions I could answer and some they did not want. The cassette recorder in my jacket felt like a rock. Suspicion pushed me forward. I pushed past a young officer who spluttered. Then I was kneeling on cold asphalt, reading half a child's handwriting and half a threat. The line circled in smudged pencil named a person and a street. It matched the missing person report pinned to a Alvarez's clipboard. You shouldn't be here, Alvarez. He did not sound like he was asking, you should tell me what you found, I said. My voice was quiet. I needed facts more than reassurances. My hands trembled once and I wiped them on my jacket. The circle on the asphalt had faint shoe prints across it. A neighbor, Mrs. Klein, stood behind the tape with a scarf pulled tight and her eyes fixed on the chalk. She whispered to no one. It was right where we used to play. That was an outside event. Someone had placed that circle tonight, after dusk, in the same Col D. Sac where we used to ride bikes. Alvarez studied me. You lived here once. What do you want to tell us? I said. It says her name. Keep this family from getting a false closure. Tell me everything you found. I described the handwriting. Alvarez barked a short order to Manley and directed him to photograph the chalk. His fingers moved fast, mechanical. I watched him take a close shot of the smudge and then another of the circled line. There was a sound like distant radio static under the cops' radios. I felt my pulse tick against the cheap, cracked face of my watch. They let me stay on the edge of the tape while forensic dusted the chalk. I asked about door cameras. Alvarez offered a slow nod and said, Someone's already sent us footage from Hawthorne Drive. We'll pull it. I left the Cul de Sac and walked the short row of houses toward the neon signage of the diner that had never really closed to this town's memories. My emotion root was suspicion, and it had become anger by the time I slid into the back booth and set my recorder on the scarred Formica. Ellie was already there, hands folded over a coffee cup gone cold. He pushed a stained index card across the table toward me. I kept it. Ellie, I didn't want to, but I kept it. I did not touch the card at first. The printing looked like a child's pressing too hard. One line was circled in red pencil. The circled line matched the line on the Cul D. Sac chalk. Why did you keep it? I asked. Ellie shrugged. Because someone has to keep track. Because when we were kids we promised each other we'd keep it in the box. Because I thought if I kept it, nothing else would happen. Maya appeared in the window reflection, smoking through the diner's back door. She slid into the booth opposite Ellie and across from me. You brought it out, she said. You never should have, I said. Ellie, show me everything. He turned the card. Lines ran across it in a childish rhythm. They were small sentences, each predicting a small event, like a data sheet. The first few lines were petty: lost cat, broken window, stolen lunchbox. Then lines changed tone. They stopped being childish and became precise about people who would vanish or be hurt. The circled line named the neighbor. I said, read the whole thing out loud. Ellie's voice was low, but steady until he reached the red circled sentence. She disappears by the porch light. He read. He looked at me. We circled that one because it happened to Mrs. Kelton when we were 12. We thought it was coincidence then. Maya's hand clenched around the cigarette. We swore we'd never say the last line out loud again, she said. We swore if we found a new line we'd burn the card. We swore we wouldn't let it write itself. A tension shift came then. Suspicion moved into guilt and then into heated blame. Why didn't you burn it, Ely? I asked. Why keep it at all? Because I'm a coward, he said, and the words hit in a plain, small way. Because I told myself I could study it. I thought I could figure out the pattern. I broke the rule. Maya attacked his posture with her own short lines. You kept it in your glove compartment. You sat on it through exams, Ely. You yourself, nothing. You us nothing. You watched it, Ellie answered with 3 quick lines of denial and then a 1-word admission. I know that argument collapsed into silence. I thought of the cull, Sack again. Outside, the town's neon signs blinked. The conversation had moved the plot. It raised a specific charge against Ellie. We had, collectively, violated one of our own rules. We drove to the abandoned playground behind the elementary school that sat like an afterthought behind a chain-link fence. The swings had been stripped of their seats. The merry-go-round had a rusted wheel. A single street lamp hummed. We cut through the low weeds with flashlights and found a fresh chalk circle on the cracked asphalt near the slide. The circle's writing was new and sharp. One line pointed at me by implication. The words named an event that would include my name and a time. My breath left my mouth, doubt slotted into fear. Maya placed her palm on the chalk, close enough to see the dust cling to her skin. This wasn't here when I drove past an hour ago, she said. I checked. Ellie crouched and traced part of the writing with his finger. He wiped it on his sleeve, then looked up. It calls someone by description, he said, not a name. But it fits you, I said. We leave. Now Maya shook her head. You always run. You left when you could have stayed to help. You left the box behind. You left us. Her hands were small and worked like someone pulling stitches free. That sentence became a second confrontation. We argued about what we had sworn as children, about who had been present the night the game changed. I said the night was an accident of curiosity. Maya, it was a choice. Each line of dialogue pushed us further apart. Ellie suggested we look for cameras. There's a neighbor with a doorcom on Hawthorne. If we can pull footage from last night, we might see who drew that circle. He took a phone from his pocket and thumbed it with practiced movement. At his garage, he hooked the camera up to his laptop, and we watched grainy footage of the cull sack from just before midnight. The clip showed a small figure at the edge of the frame reciting lines in a child's sing-song. The voice was thin, and an audio glitch made it wobble. For a second, the wobble produced a resonance that sounded close to my voice. The filter on the laptop made the sound brittle, like paper over a speaker. That reveal changed our understanding. Someone or something was imitating our childhood sounds. Maya's mouth worked. That sounds like you. Sometimes, she said, but it's not you. It can't be you. Her tone was an attempt at logic that shook. Ellie froze the frame and pointed. Look here. The figure mouths the rhyme and then steps back. The porch light goes out. The neighbor's door opens. The figure walks away. There's no face. We tried to test it. We went back to the cull, sack under a street light, and attempted what felt like a childish experiment. We erased one line of chalk with water and left the rest. We refused to say the words out loud. The clock on the diner wall ticked a second slower. I felt a change in pressure against the back of my neck. A man walking his dog across the street doubled over and fell. His pulse stopped long enough for a squad to arrive. The erased line described him by name and action. Our interference had coincided with that collapse. A new fear crept up. Action provoked consequence. Maya shoved me. You think you can fix it by asking questions. You erased it. You the question. You did this. Her accusation landed like a thrown object. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her the erasure was to protect someone else. Instead, I felt nausea and a tightening in my jaw. A second emotion shift unfurled. Anger shifted into raw, physical fear. Ellie pulled at his collar. We tried a test. The test failed. We need another way. We need the box. I remembered the attic above my childhood room immediately. The wooden box we used to keep small things in had been warped by time, but held a single index card with the rhyme on it. We had hidden the last line under a nail, thinking a physical concealment would prevent the last sentence from being spoken. The box was the locus of our choices. It had meaning beyond memory. I climbed the narrow attic stairs at midnight. The house smelled of old paper and lint. My hands found the warp box under a collapsed blanket. It was exactly where I'd left it as a child, behind a row of National Geographics. My fingers were careful. I could feel the nail under the thin lid, where we had tucked the final line away. The attic light flickered when I reached for the lid. A scraping sound came from the far eave. I froze and listened. That was an external event. Someone or something had moved up there with me. I pried the lid. The card inside was thinner than I expected, edges softened by oil. Every line was written in the same cramped child's hand. The last line had been cut and tucked under the nail. A pressure sat in my chest. I read aloud, quietly, the first lines to keep myself steady. My voice came out flat and close to a whisper. Then I heard a low exhale behind me, and a syllable that matched the rhyme landed in the air. It was not my voice. The attic breathed with a small, precise pronunciation of the words we had sealed away. "Finish it or burn it," a voice said. And the voice sounded like the hesitant echo of my own mouth. I turned. A figure stood in the dark by the rafters, but its features were blurred as if seen through wet glass. It did not step forward, it only watched. I picked the card up. My hands shook in a way that made paper slip. The figure repeated the last portion, drawing out the final sound. I could either complete the line aloud, which felt like handing the rhyme its instruction, or destroy the card and risk some other consequence I could not name. I thought of the man who collapsed. I thought of the neighbor folded over a porch rail. My decision now mattered. I struck a match. The flame flared small and hot. The figure in the rafters moved a fraction closer when the light came on. I set the card near the match, then crushed the flame on the box's edge. The paper caught and blackened. For a moment the attic smelled of singed cardboard. The sound of the figure became a scraping high on the rafters and then silence. My fingers were blistered where I had held the match too close. I felt pain and a thin relief. Then the attic light failed. I heard a breath by my ear that sounded specifically like my own intake of air. A syllable, soft and precise, completed the line I had burned. The match had burned off the letters, but not the requirement. The presence had taken the missing word and spoken it into the darkness. I grabbed the box and dropped it down the stairs. I ran without lighting the path. The kitchen table hit my hip as my shoulder slammed into it. I shouted, "Ellie! Maya!" My voice scraped on the house like a tool. They were outside, pounding at the door. I opened it and they pushed in, faces wide, coffee in hand and confusion across their expressions. Ellie demanded, "What happened?" I looked at him and said, "It spoke." My words were short, hard, at the last line. It used my sound. Maya's fingers dug into my sleeve. "Then why did it say it when you burned the card?" Her speech was rapid, 3 questions stacked. I had no answer that satisfied the gravity of the attic. The evidence had changed. Destroying the physical document had no longer removed the mechanism. The pattern had moved from paper to air. That was the twist. We had assumed the card anchored the predictions. The footage and the attic proved otherwise. The thing could reproduce the cadence it needed. We recorded a survivor log in my car with the engine ticking and the heater off so our breaths would register plain on the track. My hands were steady enough to hold the phone. I spoke into it with the low, breathy voice I had learned to use when recounting things I wanted to sound controlled. I said the attic had finished the last line. I described the figure's posture and the exact word it used. My voice slowed. Maya interrupted a few times, her lines short and sharp. It sounded like you, she said. It looked like nothing. Ellie added, we have to lock everything down. We have to mark times. We have to tell someone the back. And fourth fulfilled the rule about rapid exchanges in arguments. At least 3 lines snapped between them. The call to action for us was immediate and mechanical. We listed names, times, and witnesses. We decided to document photos, recordings, timestamps. The act of making a list made me less hysterical. It made me practical. It was a way to anchor myself to tasks. We packed the warped box into my trunk and decided not to destroy anything further without consensus. Before we drove away, I adjusted the cracked face of my cheap wristwatch. The glass had a new hairline fracture I hadn't noticed before. In the small circle of the crack was a penciled date I did not recognize. A tiny ring of graphite had been circled around a number that matched the countdown pattern on the card. I stared at that circled date until the digits blurred. That was the lingering sign. It sat under the dust on my wrist like a chosen appointment. I locked the car and sat with my hands on the wheel. The town dawn light made the horizon a smear of cold. I recorded one more thing into my phone. That we were alive, that the last line had been spoken by something that could echo us, that the rules we swore to follow had been broken long ago. My voice hit the microphone with little breath, each word spaced. The last concrete image I allowed myself before shutting my phone off was the circled date on my wristwatch reflected in the rearview mirror. I touched the crack and felt a raised edge under my thumb. It felt like a decision carved into skin. We left the Cul de Sac behind with sirens in the near distance and 3 people who had once been children trying to make adult choices. The small conflict that began with bitter argument and accusation had moved to action. Document, observe, wait. The chapter ends with me turning the key in the ignition, keeping the box in the trunk, and noticing the circled date on my cracked watch as the car rolled forward toward the highway. The circled number matched the countdown we could not fully stop. That single action, starting the car with the private mark on my wrist, closed the scene with a concrete beat and a clear decision to keep a record rather than to destroy it completely. The sheriff slammed the index card flat on the diner table, and the sugar shaker jumped 3 inches. Suspicion sat in my throat like grit as he held my wrist with one hand and pushed the weathered card forward with the other. You need to stay away from there, he said, and his voice was the kind that left no room for an argument. The napkin in my free hand folded under my palm. My fingers left a crescent of dirt across the print. I had been pulled out of my truck 3 minutes earlier, 2 blocks from the Cul de Sac, because someone reported me climbing down to look. I remember the officer's palm on my wrist then, the same rough callus under his thumb. That memory, the tape, the officer grabbing me, was what the sheriff reminded everyone of when he said my name like an accusation. My name in his mouth tightened the room. Sheriff, you brought this to me, I asked. My voice tried for calm and clipped the edges off whatever patience I had left. I bent to touch the card and the sheriff's hand stopped me. He had been small town sheriff forever. His uniform smelled of rain and sweat. He set a Miller folder beside the card. The folder had new incident reports. The top sheet showed a name I'd seen in a redacted file months ago. The first shift in my emotion happened while the table hummed under the fluorescent lights. Suspicion snapped into anger when the sheriff smiled at me without teeth. You keep coming back, he said. People are scared. I pushed back by naming what I was doing there. I came to see the pattern. I said I came to prove it's nonsense. Prove it where? The sheriff asked. He tapped a line on the index card with a finger that left a darker circle. The card's pencil letters were faded but legible. Someone had circled a single line in red at some point. The circle looked like a wound. The room smelled of coffee and diesel. Coffee from the diner, diesel from my truck idling outside. Mara came in then. She moved like someone who had been holding her breath for days, and finally let it out. She shoved a photograph into my hand without preamble. The photograph was damp at one corner, glued to a smear of orange dust. I didn't have to look long before my mouth went dry again. A child's shoe, half buried near a culvert, matched a line from the rhyme. My anger folded into doubt when I saw the shoe. Doubt pressed at my ribs with each breath. "Mara," I said. "You found this where?" "Under the bank wall," she said. Her voice bounced off the diner counter, right where the second line says the shoe would lie. "I went because you were here, and the deputy wouldn't let me talk to you." She put another hand on the table, and the sheriff glanced at her like she had committed a crime. Mara's hands shook when she spoke. She'd been my closest friend as a kid, and she carried that old bluntness now, only edged by fear. In 2 short sentences, she forced me to accept the possibility that the pattern was not just in my head. The second emotional shift settled. Anger to doubt to a low, tight fear. They moved me into the back booth, and the sheriff poured a new pot of coffee while Deputy Ansel flicked a thumb through evidence footage on his phone. Ansel handed the phone across the table, like handing over a verdict. The clip was grainy and short. The date stamp read 2 weeks earlier. The footage showed the cul-de-sac at dusk. Children's bikes leaned against a mailbox. A figure walked through the empty circle of chalk and stopped. My stomach turned 'cause the figure, hood low, shoulders hunched, was me. "That's you," the sheriff said. He did not ask. He slid the phone back to me. The image sat there with my face blurred by low resolution, and under the blur, the way I moved the same as I did now. My first reaction was a practical list. I checked the timestamp, the angle, the shadows. Then the list failed. I knew where I had been 2 weeks ago. I had been logging receipts at a diner in the next county. That knowledge turned the doubt into a new, colder fear. "I wasn't there," I said. The words were thin. "We all want you to say that, Ansel." He folded his hands and watched me. "But people say the same things until someone from the paper points out the pattern. Then they start counting." He tapped the card again. His voice was patient, then used. The librarian came up in my mind, quick and precise. Mrs. Whitcomb, with her cardigan that always smelled of lemon oil. I asked the sheriff to call her. We drove to the library 4 blocks over. The bell over the library door gave a brittle jangle when we entered. Mrs. Whitcomb had a red folder stacked under her arm. She pushed it across the desk without a preface, and we opened it there, standing between the card catalogue and the returns box. In the folder were missing person reports with dates and blunt descriptions. The boy found at the river. The woman who never came back from her shift. A newspaper clipping from 30 years ago showed the same chalk circle in front of an old grocery. The caption described a children's game and quoted a line from the rhyme. The citations on the clipping tracked back through decades like a ledger. I kept saying the word ledger in my head and then stopped. I could not make ledger into a comfort. "Mrs. Whitcomb," I said, "did you know any of these people?" "I checked the old local papers when you called," she said. Her voice had a brittleness that made me picture brittle paper. "We have records. Not everything is online. Not everything gets copied." She handed me the redacted folder. The redactions were heavy black blocks that made names disappear like abrupt blinks. I ran my thumb along one of the tier marks. Seeing the blacked outlines changed doubt into a practical, working anger. I wanted to peel the redactions open and read names myself. When we left the library, dusk had thickened into early night. The cul-de-sac was cordoned off by yellow tape again. People stood beyond it in small groups, voices low. A hastily erected memorial of paper cups with candles had melted into wax rings on the curb. The town's grief sat in short sentences. I walked to the edge despite the sheriff's glare and rid the candles like tolly marks. Councilman Rudd came forward with a microphone of righteous fury and a string of accusations. "We've seen the pattern," he said into the horn. "We can't have someone wandering into our kids' play spaces. My name, and the crowd repeated it in a low share of suspicion. Mara stepped in front of me then and spoke faster than the group could react. You don't get to make him the story. Mara, not without facts. Not without seeing what we found. Mara, I started. Listen, she said. I found a photo. I saw the shoe. I want to help him. 3 short lines ricocheted. Councilman Rudd held the microphone like a judge. He spoke in clipped sentences and used the word pattern the way a man uses a hammer. The town split around it. The crowd's mood moved in waves, and my shoulders tightened with each wave. That tightening was not an abstract mood. It set my hands to work. We had to make a choice. The evidence was stacking faster than explanations. The second external event came when Mara pushed a folded scrap into my palm, a map she detraced from the rhyme's references. She touched my arm to steady me and said, "If this is happening again, we can find the next point." Her fingers were steady then. Her resolve forced me to choose between leaving town under suspicion or chasing an answer that might prove me guilty or innocent. We took the truck to the edge of the Cul de Sac. The night had a wind that pushed loose trash in small circles near the storm drain. I felt the third emotional shift as resolve tightened. The anger and doubt condensed into a single sharp hunger to see the sequence through. Mara climbed into the passenger seat and laid the wet photograph on the dashboard. "You know I'll come with you?" she said. "You sure?" I asked. "You dragged me into this when we were kids," she said. "I'm not letting you go alone now." Our voices were low. The decision to test the rhyme was a quick knot of planning and arguing. We drove with the map between us and the radio off. The truck's cab smelled of damp canvas and my old sweatshirt. I checked the digital watch on my wrist out of habit. The cracked face reflected orange light from a passing stoplight. We started at the spot the card suggested and worked outward, checking the rhyme's lines against the town like a checklist. Each correct match tightened the air. When we found a scuffed bicycle hidden behind a chain link fence, my breath stopped for a second and Mara whispered there. The discovery made our plan feel less like superstition and more like a series of coordinates. The fourth external event came at the abandoned school. The basement door hung open with a strip of black tape across the handle. I had been in that basement with Mara as a teenager. There had been an old furnace and a set of rusting lockers. The place smelled of mold and metal. We stepped inside with flashlights, and the beam cut the darkness into a slice that showed only what the light touched. I sat on the concrete and spread the index card flat. The circled line had been sharpened with a pencil until the paper wore thin. I pulled a pen from my pocket and began to deface the circle. My hands felt small against the paper. I wanted to make the mark meaningless, to prove the rhyme had no power over me. "Don't do that, Mara, watch me," I said. We argued in short sentences. Her fear was a physical thing. She kept glancing at the door and at the wall where kids had once drawn hopscotch squares in chalk. I pressed the pen hard into the circle. The tip hit paper and the sound was flat. The building's pipes breathed in the dark. Then a chorus of voices lifted from the east corner of the basement. They were childish, layered, small at first, and then folding into each other. The voices sang the rhyme, words broken, curious, not quite right. My pen stopped. The air dropped in temperature like a lid closing. The cold pressed against my teeth. Mara turned toward the voices and a pressure slammed the door behind us. My shoulder hit the wood. The sound of the slam vibrated up my arm, the flashlight flickered and then steadied. "Open it!" Mara shouted. Her shout bounced for a moment and then fell away. I grabbed the handle and it would not budge. The cold had moved into my hands. My fingers felt stiff and slow. The chorus continued, closer, stepping in cadence with the rhyme. The voices did not belong to any age I recognized. They overlapped like recorded tracks. A shadow uncoiled from the deepest darkness near the lockers. It moved without the usual human gait. Its edge scraped the metal of a locker door, and the sound made Mara stagger. I lunged forward to grab her, and my fingers met fabric and a ripple of damp. The shadow reached like a hand and struck Mara across the back with a force that knocked air from her lungs. Mara hit the floor, and the red circle on the index card tore at one corner. The confrontation was violent and immediate. I pulled at the shadow, and it resisted with a pressure that felt like being held underwater. Mara cuffed and pushed herself up, eyes wide and white. I saw the torn paper curl at the edge where pencil had been pressed into it for years. The chorus of voices rose into a final cadence and then stopped. We hit the next external event as the lights in the basement stuttered back to life. The shadow retreated into a seam of darkness, and the door gave with a sharp pop. I dragged Mara to the steps, and we climbed out with hands scraping against concrete. The stairs left a smell of damp paint on our clothes. A parked squad car flashed a slow blue and orange outside the windows. Blood smeared my palm where I had grabbed a rusted pipe. Mara's sweatshirt had a new tear along the shoulder. We sat on the school steps under sodium lights and looked at the card. The tear in the corner exposed a fresh graphite line that had not been there before. The new line read like a sentence added mid-count, a short, neat phrase in a different hand. I traced it with my finger and my skin prickled. What does it say, Mara? Her voice was small. I read it aloud and the letters were clear. It named a place we had not checked. It named my truck. The discovery changed something in everyone who stood there on those steps. The pattern had not been erased by our defiance. The attack had not only been physical. It had altered the record. We need to record this, I said. My hands shook as I produced a small digital recorder and set it between us on the step. I spoke into it with the same dry cadence I would use for any file. We tested the line. It attacked. We have a new line. Mara put both hands over her mouth and then released them. She looked at me like someone deciding whether to trust a plan or run. Do we keep going? She asked. We record. We follow what's next, I said. We don't let the town decide for us yet. The final external event of the chapter was a figure walking slow at the edge of the schoolyard, backlit by the sodium lamps. It paused and looked in our direction. I could not see its face. It tipped its head and then disappeared down the street. Mara and I sat with the recorder between us and listened to the night take back its breath. By the time dawn threw its first thin light across the pavement, we had a new tally. The original circle, the photo of the shoe, archived clippings, the surveillance clip, and now a torn card with a fresh line. The chapter's small conflict resolved in a way that left the larger question worse than before. We had confronted the immediate danger in the basement and survived, but the evidence tightened the cord around my reputation. I rapped my knuckles on the recorder and felt the hollow, steady vibration. The sheriff called at sunrise and asked for names of witnesses. I told him Mara's and Mrs. Whitcomb's and Deputy Ansell's. I gave him the photograph and the torn card. He listened and then said, "Keep back for now. We'll do protective detail." His promise did not sound promising. Mara held the map in her lap and pointed to the new location written on the torn paper. "We should prepare," she said, "if it's moved to the truck." It could be anything. I nodded and then remembered the officer's hand on my wrist when I first arrived months ago. Memory from the yellow tape had become evidence now. I said the memory out loud to anchor it. They grabbed my wrist at the tape, remember. That's when this all started again. Mara repeated the detail, saying it made the fact solid. The chapter closed with that repeated, small action, naming the touch that had moved us back into the story. We drove away from the school with the index card between us, the recorder humming faintly in the cup holder, and my watch face cracked and catching the first pale sun. The siren noise of the town's fear had not gone away. It had only changed tempo, emotion route. Suspicion had carried me through the diner and into every decision. I shifted from suspicion to anger, from anger to doubt, and from doubt to a fear that made planning urgent. Those shifts drove the choices. To demand records, to accept Mara's photograph, to go to the library, to read Surveillance, and finally to test the rhyme in the abandoned school. The chapter ends with a concrete beat, the torn index card showing a new line that names my truck, and Mara pointing at it while the sheriff promises protection. The next step is to decide whether to defend the truck or abandon it, and the choice will be made in the morning light. I pried the warped lid and the box split open. A folded index card slid free and Marla barked from the attic doorway. "You brought it back." Suspicion sat in my throat the way dust sits in a closed room. It pushed me forward before I even looked at the card. I fumbled the paper with fingers that still smelled of attic wood and stale coffee, and my mouth made a dry sound. I had come to destroy the last line. That was the problem. I carried up the stairs. Someone had put the rhyme back into the house. I should name details now, so there is no mistaking where I stood. I live at the edge of town, in the same narrow house with peeling gutters and a crooked front step where I learned to count chalk circles. I am 32, lean, with a threadbare sweatshirt I have kept too long, and a wristwatch cracked across its screen. I arrived straight from the police tape that I had forced my way past weeks earlier. Sheriff Keats had grabbed my wrist then, and the tape still left a faint rub across my palm. That scene sits on top of tonight. Smashed glass, the sugar shaker on the diner table, the sheriff having slammed the index card flat. I thought I could control this by memory and action. Suspicion made me act. Marla stood half in shadow in the attic door, hair pulled back, wearing the same faded navy jacket I remember from school reunions. Her voice had the flatness of someone who had learned to keep danger in a measured tone. "Why did you open it?" she asked, and the question landed like a hand on my shoulder. I folded the card open on my knee. The last line was circled in a child's impatient pencil. The circle was smudged from where someone had raked a thumb across it. I pulled the card so the words faced me. "You done get to decide for me," I said. "You done get to hide it again." My voice had a rasp I didn't recognize. Marla's face tightened. "You brought this here 2 days ago," she said. "Deputy Harlan saw you even. She named me like a charge." "Don't tell me you think you can fix it alone." I flinched. Naming raised stakes. Marla's certainty made my hands go colder. Emotion shifted. Suspicion slid into guarded anger. The attic smelled of dust, old glue, and a single forgotten toy. A wooden soldier with one chipped eye. I set the card beside the toy. "I didn't bring it back," I said. My fingers traced the pencil circle. I found the box under the eaves. I tried to make the statement neat. Marla took a step down from the threshold, boots heavy on the attic ladder under the eaves. "Who else goes near your roof at night?" she asked. Her voice kept pace with her steps. She wanted names. I had none. A thump below made us both look toward the kitchen. Someone moved in the rooms under us. We froze and listened. The house carried every noise straight through its floorboards. The thump repeated and quickened to a booted foot on the stairs. Deputy Harlan pushed the kitchen door open, packet clutched in his hand. He smelled like rain and cold metal. His jacket was flecked with road grit. "Even," he said without a greeting and set the packet down on the counter. "You need to see this." He lifted the top sheet the way a man might flip a coin and his face went flat. He did not blink. Harlan's redacted folder had a typed timeline and pasted photographs. Without looking up, he said, "Sheriff Keats me to deliver it in person. Tonight's stamp is here." He snapped the folder closed and opened it again, revealing a new entry with tonight's date in bold type. I felt the timeline press against the back of my teeth. Every prediction had matched a death. That was a fact Sheriff Keats had shown me at the diner. This packet made the fact feel immediate and legal. The room tightened around us with concrete evidence. Marla leaned on the counter and read over my shoulder. "That's the pattern," she said, voice low. "Every card dated, every entry matched." The word matched as if it were a seal. "Look here, this handwriting." Same pressure. She tapped a photo of a chalk circle at the Cull D sack, fresh and ringed with disturbed gravel. She squinted at the handwriting on an index card pinned to a swing. "This is mine," she said abruptly, and her finger moved to the loop of a letter that matched a scrawl from her childhood school records. Or it looked like mine once. Harlan folded his arms. "Marla, you were listed missing when you were 8. Keats covered it up then. He covered a lot of things. You're saying this comes back to you." His voice slid from interrogation to accusation and back. Marla's jaw worked. Her hands found the edge of the packet. She swallowed. "I don't know what it means," she said, "but I remember the rhyme. I remember the rhythm. I remember." She stopped, fingers twitching. Her throat worked. The memory showed in her hands. A child clutching chalk like a promise. I had to force my voice to steady. "Sheriff Keats gave me a card at the diner," I said. "He slammed it down like a grievance. He me to stay away." He looked right at me. He was afraid. Naming him made the room colder. "He me, this is old town business." I let the words land. Harlan looked at the ceiling and then at the packet again. Marla turned the index card over and under. Outside, headlights passed. Someone moved along the street. We left the house in a haste that did not allow for neatness. The three of us moved in a stepped procession toward the playground the deputy said had a fresh circle. I drove. Marla rode shotgun. Harlan rode in the back, the redacted packet on his knees like a Bible. The car smelled of damp wool and the old cigarette smoke the upholstery hadn't lost. My hands penetrated the wheel with a small, repeated tremor. Emotion shifted again. Guarded anger moved into taut fear. When we climbed the rusted ladder to the carousel, the town felt packed with eyes. The playground sat under a single sodium lamp that hummed. The chalk circle on the asphalt was new. The white dust lay in a powder ring with a single index card pinned to the swing. The card's pencil was fresh. One name had been circled. Marla's breath left in a small, sharp sound even. "Look," Marla pointed. "That's my handwriting." "That's the way I loop my voice." She sounded factual, not pleading. Harlan walked around the circle and photographed everything with his phone. "This got put here after 11:30, he said. "Witnesses say headlights left at midnight." He looked up at the stars as if they might explain the movement. "We have one man missing from the cull. Sack earlier. We have this pin. We have a time." Marla walked to the swing and ran her thumb along the pencil line. "When I was small, I would circle the last line so it stayed true." She said, voice thin. "I didn't know why I did it then. I only know the act." She looked at me and then away. Her gaze landed on a chalk smudge near the curb. "Even, you were the last one at the tracks that night," she said, and the words hit like a thrown stone. I felt the old tape memory in my wrist, the sheriff's hand, and the guilt rolled in. I pushed past the tape. I said my name. Sheriff Keats let me in a hair early. The cull sack smelled of diesel and chalk. I was not allowed to keep the memory as private. I had to name it. I went because I wanted to see the circle. I wanted to know if the rhyme was a child's trick. My voice shortened. It wasn't T. The sentence ended in a dry, small sound. Harlan's phone buzzed. He checked it and cursed under his breath. "There's been a new entry in a Keats memo. It's redacted, but the date is tonight. Keats is on his way." He looked at me, even. "Are you sure you didn't disturb anything?" He the question like a man who had to account for his own doubt. I opened my mouth and closed it. Marla's hands lowered like she was helping the silence settle. We argued at the edge of the circle because there was no other way to move. Marla wanted to take the card and burn it. Harlan wanted to secure evidence and call the sheriff. I wanted to perform a counter step I remembered from a child's rhyme that had lost its rhyme to me years ago, but had lodged like a splinter. The argument moved fast. "Burn it, Marla. Burn the card and we end the line. You can to destroy evidence." Harlan snapped. "Keats will see it and call this a tampering." "Even, you said you wanted to record everything?" "I did want to record it," I shot back. "I still do. But not if it means letting it keep calling names. This is reckless. Harlan, this is your mess." "Even my mess." Marla cut in. Harlan, you helped cover things when you were a kid. Keats signed papers. You know the names. Harlan stepped closer. Don't make this about me, Marla. We have a missing man. Marla's fingers found the card. Her nails dug into the paper. Fine, she said, then do something. Rapid exchanges ended with nothing resolved. The argument was a coil tightening around us. That exchange counted as one of the chapter's confrontations. It left us raw. We moved to the rusted carousel because the center was bare of surveillance and the ground ringed with cracked concrete where the chalk dust would not be washed away quickly. I forced my hands to remember the rhythm of a child's counting game. The rhyme told steps in a cadence. 1. Place the card. 2. Circle the name. 3. Blow the breath. 4. Step out. I paused in the action. The steps felt concrete under my palms, not symbolic. I folded the card and prepared to break the loop by erasing the circle. Marla, if you were going to try that, do it right. She moved beside me and held a small brass lighter. Her hands were steady. Harlan kept his jacket on, packet inside, phone lit. He watched like a man guarding a bank vault. I wanted to believe that a deliberate action could sever cause and effect. We tried a counter, ritual the way you might try to close a wound when all you have is a bandage. I held the card over the lighter. Marla recited a line she said her mother had taught her, a child's halting poem that had once soothed bedtime. Harlan gripped my shoulder, hard and then softer, as if checking whether I could still choose. We were 3 bodies making a decision. The air tasted of ozone and copper from the lighter as flame. When the flame touched the card, the pencil line flared black for a split second, and the smoke smelled like burned paper and cheap wax. The card did not burn away cleanly. The pencil circle resisted. The paper puckered but remained in my hand. For a single breath, I believed we had stopped the pattern. Then the chalk ring at our feet trembled. A noise rose from the center of the circle, a child's voice repeating the rhyme in a small, mocking cadence I had heard in my head for months. It sounded like a toy playing a recording, but it came from the ground. Marla choked and dropped the lighter. Harlan cursed and stepped backward. The voice kept counting. Concrete reality intervened. A scrape of nails on concrete, the smell of warm breath that wasn't ours. The entity had returned. The thing in the chalk circle was not tall. It was wrong in the way a puppet can be wrong, joints that bent the wrong way, a head tipped with an odd tilt. It moved with a small child's mimicry, copying the little stumbles and rhythms of a child reciting the rhyme. Its face was not a face so much as a flatness with suggestions. A roundness where eyes would be, a hint of a mouth, and a smudge of something that looked like powdered chalk where cheeks should be. One more line, and the voice had my town's summer carnival in it, and the hollow of an old radio. Marla stepped forward and shouted, "No! Stay back!" Her hand closed around my wrist. Her fingers dug in. I could feel the trimmer in her palm. Harlan drew his service light and swung it, aiming to blind whatever stood in the circle. The light splashed over the puppet's surface, and it flinched like an animal. The creature, or whatever it was, moved to the outside of the ring and tilted its head to watch us. "Do not let it name another," I said. My voice was a dry blade. If it names someone, it claims them. I thought of the timeline in Harlan's packet. I thought of the sheriff's mouth when he slammed the index card on the table. I thought of the missing man and of the photograph of the cull, sack that had a name circled in pencil. Marla squeezed my hand and tightened her jaw. "We stop it now," she said. "We do this together." Harlan barked an order. "Even, take the card." "Marla, stand ready." "I'm going to circle around and block the street." He moved with purpose. His body spoke law and procedure. He had learned to be decisive under pressure. He called orders with short sentences and simple verbs. The plan formed in small pieces. Distract, secure, remove the card. We executed with too little rehearsal. I stepped into the circle because a choice held me there. The creature watched my boots sink a little in the chalk dust. I held the card out, trying to make the flame touch it again, trying to make the circle erase. The entity spoke, its voice stretched at the edges. You left your name, it said. You left it open. The words were not accusatory. They were a simple report. The choice came faster than any of us expected. Something in the creature's voice matched a child's cadence that I remembered from the night of the first disappearance. It repeated a name we all knew from town. Jory Malden. Marla's face went white. Harlan lunged. The entity's head snapped toward him like a child's doll registering a new toy. Its fingers extended, and for a breath I saw motion like a child's reaching for comfort. Then the chalk dust rose and a hand, too small and too thin, snagged Harlan's sleeve. Marla screamed. I lunged forward and grabbed Harlan's other arm. The creature's grip was like a magnet, not a hand. It hooked and pulled. Something in the playground's geometry shifted. My watch slipped off my wrist when I moved. Harlan's boots scraped concrete hard enough that sparks rose. He cursed and kicked. 1 second he was here. The next a gap yawned where he stood. His jacket sagged, then hummed with a sound like a swallowed radio static. Marla fell against me and vomited a small sound of anger and terror. I pulled with both hands. Harlan's fingers left a clean smear of blood on my palm. They left a physical fact. He made a sound like a prayer and then he was gone. Not vanishing in theater smoke, gone with a concrete absence of weight. The creature tilted its head and then retreated into the circle, crawling low, like a child hiding under a table. The chalk dust settled back into a ring as if nothing had disturbed it. We stood panting with the smell of burnt paper and ozone in our throats. There was a mendable horror in the shape of the moment. Someone had been taken. Marla laughed in a small, broken way. Harlan, she said, calling his name like a bell. Harlan. She stepped to the circle and reached, but I held her back. We need to seal it, I said. My hands shook. We need to document this. We need to stop anyone else from touching it. I spoke procedure because the world needed structure now. She nodded once and then began to move with an efficiency that looked like resignation. We dragged Harlan's radio and phone records back to the diner and turned a back booth into an evidence table before the first light washed the horizon. I had never imagined I would set chairs around a packet and consider how memory and paper met. We laid photographs, the redacted memo, the flicked card, and the scrap of Harlan's jacket across the table. Sheriff Keats arrived with his own set of documents. A black folder ragged at the edges, the redacted memo stamped with an official seal. His face had the same practiced calm he wore when sealing off a scene. He looked at the empty chair across from him and then at Marla. We done have time for games. Keats, we need to contain this. He opened his folder and slid a photo toward Marla. The photograph showed a child sitting on a curb, chalk in hand. The child's face matched no one in the room, but had Marla's old haircut. You were on this list, he said. We closed your file. His voice did not hide the fact that he had been part of the cover up. The room tightened. Marla's jaw set and she looked away. Keats' submission was a twist that rewired the evidence. He had not only sealed files, but had always known the stakes. Why did you hide it? I asked. My question was a small, honest instrument. Keats' eyes did a quick slide. Keats replied, we thought it would stop if we kept it quiet. His answer was thin and wrong. He adjusted the papers as if smoothing a shirt. We were wrong. Marla pushed a photograph hard enough that the paper shivered. You put my name under missing, Keats, she said. You made me disappear when I was 8. Why? There was no accusation that softened. It was a direct strike. Keats' jaw twitched. He did not deny details. We thought we could fold it into something lawful, he said. We thought we could keep a lid on a child's game. A new twist landed. Keats' protection turned from defense to admission that the town had shaped the pattern by hiding it. That changed where blame sat. It shifted our strategy. If the town's secrecy had fed the pattern, then exposure might become a tool instead of silence. But that idea was dangerous. Exposure also meant naming more cards aloud. We argued about naming. Marla wanted to read every index card publicly. Keats wanted to quarantine the documents. I wanted neither. I wanted to stop the naming without making it legitimate. If we say names in public, more will hear it, and the pattern will have new voices, I said. If we quarantine Keats, then the town will pretend nothing happened again. My sentences were short. Each contained a demand. Marla's hands shook. Then what? She asked. Even do something. Her voice was pleading and precise. Harlan's jacket lay on the booth seat, empty and warm where he had been. The missing man's phone called once, and then dropped to voicemail. The machine recorded nothing but a hollow click. The outside world remained ordinary in its hours. Someone served a coffee, a waitress refilled sugar. Inside the booth, time had a stitched seam. We chose a plan that fit the limited tools we had. Document everything, create witnesses who could attest to the events, and perform a counter that would sever the paper's hold without naming a living person. Marla would keep the cards locked in the box. Keats would sign a public sealed affidavit acknowledging the town's files without stating names. I would drive the sealed box to a place outside town and bury it where the soil was iron and dry. It was a plan made of small movements. We enacted it in the dim hours before dawn. Marla handed me the warped box. The wooden latch clicked under my thumb. Keats watched with an expression I'd seen on men who negotiated treaties. He slid a paper across the table, an affidavit heavy with redaction. He signed and folded it. His pen left an indelible mark of complicity. Harlan's radio buzzed from my car where it had fallen. The battery was warm. We packed the packet into the box along with the card. At the last moment, Marla grabbed my sleeve. If you do this, even, promise me one thing. When you drive, don't stop until past the old ranger station. Don't look back. The sentence was a command. Her eyes were wet but dry at the rims, a concrete physical sign of fear. I nodded. I promised with a physical motion. My head dipped and my shoulder relaxed. The promise moved us. I drove with the lights off for the first miles, and then with low beams on. The road ran like a scratch through the map. The box sat behind the seat, heavy and solid. My wristwatch read 11:58 when I turned onto the dirt road that cut toward the ranger station. The sky held the last pieces of night. I felt the weight of the box at my back like a second passenger. I stopped at the ranger station because I needed a place to put the box where the earth would accept it without ceremony. I dug with my hands until the soil slipped between my fingers and the box sat snug in the hole. I covered it with dirt, tamped it down, and pressed stones on top. I took a last look at the box and thought about the sequence of events that had led me to bury a town's paper in the dirt. I felt decisive for a breath. Then I brushed my hands clean on my jeans and climbed into the car. The road out of town showed the first edge of dawn. I turned the key and the engine answered with a cough. As I moved down the highway, the radio sputtered with static, then cleared with a morning show laughing about nothing important. I drove with my hands cold on the wheel and my throat dry. I had hoped that burying the box was the end, a concrete action that would stop the naming. That hope was an action with limits. At the edge of my shoulder, inside the pocket of the threadbare sweatshirt I had stuffed into the seat, something poked against my ribs. I reached without thinking and my fingers found a folded card. I had not put that card in the box. It had been tucked into my shirt when I left the diner. I unfolded it with my thumb and there it was. Blank but for a faint pencil stroke that had darkened by one mark. Someone had started a pencil loop in the center of the card. My heartbeat became a concrete rhythm in my throat. My watch read 12:09. The card had a mark. That was a fact. I pulled the car to the shoulder and turned off the engine. The breeze moved the cracked plastic of the dashboard. I held the blank card in my hand and watched the faint pencil stroke crawl darker, as if the graphite were hunting for a name. I felt the last emotion settle into my bones, resignation edged with a small, functional dread. I folded the card back into my shirt and started the engine. I drove away with the box buried and the card tucked to my chest. Dawn creased the horizon and the world went on. My watch ticked. The pencil mark had darkened again when I glanced down. I felt the physical weight of the choice I had made. To bury official papers and to carry proof in a stitched pocket that could not be shown without answering new questions. I had kept my promise to Marla to drive beyond the ranger station without stopping. I had kept my hands on the wheel. There were no more immediate miracles. There was a small, precise consequence. I had a card with a slow, darkening pencil mark forming on it, and a town that would not be quiet if anyone looked close enough. I drove until the road angled away from the lights of my childhood and let the car hum in the steady way of machines. I felt the H in my hands where Harlan's fingers had dug in. I felt Marla's breath on my shoulder in the attic. I felt the sheriff's folded papers under my thumb. I felt concrete facts, not ideas. I parked at a rest stop and set the card on my knee. I frowned at the pencil line and watched it swell. I made a decision with my body. I folded the card into quarters and slid it into a new envelope. I wrote nothing on it. I placed the envelope inside a locked glove compartment and turned the key. That act was small and deliberate. It was the kind of action that could be explained with a list. Protect, hide, monitor. I drove away from the town with the glove compartment locked and the box buried. I did not stop until the sun had climbed high enough that the shoulder of the road shimmered. I told myself I had done what I could. That was true in the narrow sense of action. The last concrete event of the night was the small pencil stroke growing darker in my pocket, and the fact that when I pulled my shirt aside 2 hours later, the mark had formed into a faint loop that would become a name if someone in the right place touched it. I told myself stories on the drive to keep my hands steady. I told myself that what I had done would buy time. I told myself the affidavit Keats signed would create a paper trail and witnesses who could not be made to forget. I told myself something and then I put the sentence away. Action must outlive words. At the gas station before I crossed the county line, I bought a bottle of water and a coffee. The clerk asked for my name and I gave it. He wrote nothing down. I paid with cash. The world demanded small transactions and I made them. When I finally reached the highway that led toward the city, I took a long look at the glove compartment and the envelope within. I parked at a rest stop with a line of cigars behind it and wrote a simple note with a cheap pen on a napkin. If the pencil markup continues, do not read it aloud. Contact Marla. I folded the napkin and tucked it in my wallet. The decision made with my hands was an attempt to control what names might become. In the end, the night left me with an accumulation of real things. A buried box, a signed redacted memo, a missing deputy, a chalk ring, and a card with a slow pencil mark. Those were items anyone could hold up and verify. The last action of the chapter was the small, persistent pencil stroke darkening in the enclosed glove compartment, a fact that tightened my breath. I started the engine and drove on. The road swallowed the sound of my tires. The card remained folded inside a locked space, and the pencil mark had grown by 1/2 stroke when I glanced down. My choice had been concrete. Its consequence followed like a train on rails.